Thank you very much, Mr. Morris, and we'll have questions for all of you. I was home last weekend in Oregon, having opened to all town hall meetings, something that I've done throughout my time in public service. And I told my constituents that we had just completed a report that indicates that the big pharmaceutical companies pay lower tax rates than the school teachers that live in their neighborhood. And people are just kind of stunned to hear it put that way. And Mr. Setzer, you did an excellent job laying out so much of what we're dealing with here. The investigative team for the committee spent 4 years looking at these issues. And they found that Merck sold $37 billion worth of Keytruda, which is the important cancer drug, to patients in the United States at a price of $175,000 each year per patient. Now, this is an American company selling to American patients, yet little to none of the profits showed up in the United States. Virtually every dollar was offshore. And the story was essentially the same for these other big pharmaceutical companies. Why don't you, because a lot of this complicated tax lingo doesn't really resemble English. I mean, it is so complicated and Byzantine. So tell us in something that those folks who came to my town hall meetings and come to other sessions around the country will understand in response to the question, how is it possible that none of Merck's Keytruda profits show up in the United States?
Senator Wyden, that's a great question. I think I share the sense of outrage expressed by your constituents about this very fact. With Merck and with Keytruda, we actually have a pretty good idea of the ways in which Merck moves profits earned on U.S. sales out of the United States. My understanding is that Keytruda was developed out of research that was done in the United States. It was actually done by a small Dutch company. Merck bought that company and apparently kept the intellectual property in Europe, perhaps in an innovation box in the Netherlands, perhaps shifted it to another low-tax jurisdiction. We don't know. Pharmaceutical companies don't like telling us. But we do know, based on this example, based on AbbVie, which moved Humira's patents to Bermuda, we know the basics. The first step is to move the intellectual property out of the United States, one way or another. The second step is to produce the drug in a low-tax jurisdiction outside the United States. Merck produces Keytruda in Ireland. The Central Bank of Ireland actually has issued a report that warned that Ireland was relying so heavily for its export revenues on a small set of patent-protected drugs that it was a future risk to the Irish economy. A number of U.S. pharmaceutical companies are increasing their investments in Ireland precisely to sell back into the U.S. market. Now, when those drugs are sold back to the U.S. market, they've already been inflated and marked up. They already have that really high price, and the profit is attributable to the subsidiaries outside the United States. The U.S. only collects the guilty tax revenue on that. The bulk of the available tax revenue right now is already being shifted to Europe. That's why out of the $100 billion of profits that the 6 large pharmaceutical companies that report detailed data, that $100 billion, they only pay about $10 billion in tax on it. And $8 billion of that tax was not paid here. Only $2 billion was paid here. That's a real problem. It's not a future theoretical problem with Pillar 1 or Pillar 2. Those are the kind of problems that Pillar 1 and Pillar 2 are meant to solve, then can solve. So I think I do share that outrage.
Well said. Question for you, Ms. Ring. You know, there was talk about cherry picking a little bit. Joint Committee on Taxation doesn't do any cherry picking. They do it by the book. And they provided us data showing that the average tax rate of large U.S. pharmaceutical companies declined by more than 40%, 40% after enactment of the Republican 2017 tax cut. So this, of course, was a deficit-financed Republican tax cut. The big pharma companies pay a tax rate of less than 12%. Some have tax rates in single digits. The teachers and small business owners that I'm honored to represent that come to town meetings, they pay higher rates than these multi-billion-dollar multinationals. Question for you, Ms. Ring. Republicans said that their transformation and international tax work would pay off for the American people. But the evidence shows massive tax cuts, offshoring, and tax avoidance by the pharmaceutical industry. Do you agree that it is the 2017 tax law that led to these ultra-low tax rates for the big pharma companies?
Thank you for the question. It's clear that pre-TCJA, we already had profit shifting, but TCJA, the 2017 Act, made a number of additional moves that contributed to the increasingly low ETRs that we're seeing. And I'll just highlight four. First, as we've heard already, the significantly lower corporate statutory rate brought down to 21%. And then three features in the design of GILTI. First, the ability to have an initial chunk of income taxed at a 0% rate. That's your QBI, so 0. Then, in theory, the remainder of GILTI would be taxed at half of the already now lower corporate tax rate. And then you add on top of that the fact that GILTI was designed as a global regime, not country by country, which allows offsetting between high and low tax countries and also increases the incentive to offshore. So clearly some major features there.
I'm over my time. Senator Crapo.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. The discussion